The text that we are using today is appropriate for this time, but it is really long. And so I'm reading from an easy-to-read version. I'm also going to try to shorten it a bit, and I encourage you to go back at some time and look up John 11, verses 1 to 48. This is the word of the Lord. There was a man named Lazarus who was sick. He lived in a town named Bethany with his sisters Mary and Martha. Lazarus was their brother, and as he got sicker and sicker, Mary and Martha sent someone to tell Jesus, "Lord, your dear friend Lazarus is sick." When Jesus heard this, he said to his disciples, "The end of this sickness is not going to be death. No, this sickness is for the glory of God. This has happened to bring glory to the Son of God." We have to remember that Jesus loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus. But nonetheless, when he heard that he was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And then he said to his followers, "We should go back to Judea." Well, they were really upset about that because the followers knew that that the leaders of the Jewish people had tried to stone Jesus in Jerusalem. And where Lazarus was in Bethany was only 2 miles away. But Jesus said, "Don't worry about it. There are 12 hours of light in the day. If we walk in the day, we will not stumble and fall because we can see the light from the sun. But whoever walks at night will stumble because there is no light." And then Jesus said this, "Our friend Lazarus is now sleeping, but I am going there to wake him." Well, his followers thought, well, if he's sleeping, that's a really good thing. He will get well. But Jesus said plainly to them, "Lazarus is dead, and I am glad that I was not there. I am happy for you because now you will believe in me. Let's go now." Well, Jesus arrived in Bethany and found that Lazarus had already been dead and in the tomb for 4 days. Many of the Jews from Jerusalem who were friends of Mary and Martha and Lazarus came to comfort them about the death of Lazarus. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she ran out to greet him, but Mary stayed at home. And Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you anything you ask." And Jesus said, "Your brother will rise and be alive again." And Martha answered, "I know that he will rise and live again at the time of the resurrection on the last day." And Jesus said this, "I am the resurrection and the life. Everyone who believes in me will have life, even if they die. And everyone who believes in me and lives in me will never really die. Martha, do you believe this?" And Martha answered, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God. You are the one who was coming to the world." And after these things happened, Martha went back to her sister Mary, and she took Mary off to the side, and she said, "The teacher is here, and he's asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up and quickly ran to where Jesus was. All the friends who were around her thought that she was going to the tomb to cry. When Jesus saw Mary, and when she saw him, she bowed down at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw Mary crying and the people with her who were crying too, he was very upset and troubled. And he said, "Where did you put him?" And they said, "Come, Lord, and see." And Jesus cried. And the Jews said, "Look how much he loved Lazarus so much and so well." But some of them said, "Jesus healed the eyes of the blind man. Why didn't he help Lazarus and stop him from dying?" And again, feeling very upset, Jesus came to the tomb. It was a cave with a large stone covering the entrance. And he said, "Move the stone away." Martha said, Lord, there is going to be a large smell, a bad smell, because he's been in the tomb for 4 days. Then Jesus said, remember what I told you? I said, if you believed, you would see God's divine greatness. So they moved the stone away from the entrance. And then Jesus looked up and he said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I said these things because of the people around here. I want them to believe that you sent me. And after this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out. His hands and his feet were wrapped with pieces of cloth, and he had something covering his eyes and his face. So Jesus said to the people, take off the cloth and let him go. Well, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary believed in Jesus because of what he had done, but some of them went to the Pharisees and reported what Jesus had done. And then the leading priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the high council, and they said, what should we do? This man is doing many miraculous signs. If we let him continue to do these things, everyone will believe in him. Then the Romans will come and take away our temple and our nation. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, I must confess that this is an incredibly difficult text to preach on. There are so many different ideas. It raises so many questions. It's set in 2 different places, and it covers at least 4 days. We could make a full-length movie out of it if we really wanted to, if we wanted to do it justice. So I did what any preacher would do. I got on FaceTime, and I consulted with my 11-year-old grandson, Ross, who, like every other student in Virginia, was at home at his dining room table doing school. I shared a rough outline, a brief version of this story with Ross, and I said, I don't know exactly what I ought to do with this sermon and how I ought to preach it. There's so much there. And he just simply looked at me and said, Nana, what's the moral of the story? That's a great question. And all the theological and philosophical questions that arise at a time like this, I think can be summed up in 3 different ways today. If we were doing this in a different context and not in the 5th Sunday of the season of Lent and the 3rd Sunday in the season of COVID, I would preach something different. But today, with Ross's help, this is what I sense our still speaking God is saying. First, tears. Earlier this week, I was on the internet with some of my colleagues, and one of them declared, I'm really looking forward to preaching this text this Sunday because of 2 simple words. Jesus wept. I agree. These are 2 of the most comforting words in all Scripture. They speak to our human condition. They speak to our existential and very real questions about the challenge that it is as we live this embodied life, knowing that it will end, that all of us, whether from old age or illness or accidents, is eventually going to die. The reality of death is worth all the tears in the world. Jesus, knowing full well what he was going to do, wept. He wept for the grief of his dear friends, Mary and Martha. He wept for his friend Lazarus, who had suffered through illness, who went through the valley of the shadow of death, who had faced and then experienced his own mortality, his own death. 2 different times in this text, in verses 33 and 38, we find these words or something along these lines, depending on the translation, that Jesus was very disturbed. That indicates in the Greek that he was moved in his spirit, and it's not just sadness, it is more the gut-wrenching despair and anger, the deep agitation that happens when someone we love dies. I can tell you from my own personal experience that when the reality of the death of a loved one hits you, it is like being sucker punched in the gut. It's an emotional and physical and mental and spiritual earthquake of the greatest dimensions. Ancient pagan deities had, they didn't care about human feelings, and they were emotionless. But in Judaism, we have revealed to us a God who cares and is invested in the real emotions that we people have. And Jesus, fully human and fully divine, revealed a God whose gut is wrenched by human pain. I have to also wonder if Jesus didn't weep some tears of regret and frustration because he hadn't gotten there in time. I think Jesus knows exactly what it is like for us to be separated from our loved ones, not able to visit them or to touch them or to give them a hug, especially when they are sick. As good as FaceTime and Zoom are, there's really something about physical contact, about touch, about physical presence that it can't replace. I suspect that Jesus' tears were also about the fact of what he would be facing in a week's time. For Palm Sunday, or what really was known as the triumphal entry, comes quickly on the heels of this text, right after Mary anoints Jesus' head and wipes it with her hair. Jesus was looking ahead to his own imminent death. And like Jesus, with the ever-growing presence of COVID-19 within our own circles of friends and families, it has, at least temporarily, broken through our denial about our own and our loved ones' mortality. Tears are good. They are necessary for our health. They are an expression and release of the pain we experience. Scientists have discovered, actually, that emotional tears compared to tears when you get something in your eye or when you blink literally help us to cleanse our stress. Certain stress hormones are actually released in our tears. It shouldn't come then as any surprise that the psalmist wrote, "You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one of them in your book." Cry, cry. It is good for body and soul. And if you should come upon someone in your circle who is crying, who is weeping, then just be a quiet, listening, non-anxious presence for the other's tears, not trying to make them feel better or to fix them or to get them to go away. You see, for tears fix us. Community. We need each other. In verse 44, Jesus says this really interesting thing: unbind him and let him go. With divine wisdom, Jesus invited others to help and participate in the raising of Lazarus. Perhaps we might also do the same. One of the silver linings of our current situation is the realization of how much we really do need each other. I've been involved in a number of virtual gatherings in the past 2 weeks, and it seems like when the participants show up online, they seem like people have been wandering in a desert and are dying of thirst, and they have suddenly come upon an oasis, and they are getting that first wonderful, cool drink of fresh water. Early Friday morning, I made a quick run to Walmart for groceries. I qualify for senior hours. Woohoo! One worker was red-faced and sweating as he restocked the shelves, but nonetheless, he managed to smile at me. Out of a heightened awareness of the sacrifice that grocery workers are making, I smiled back. It was such a simple thing to do. And then at the checkout counter, as I stood behind the person in front of me in line, I saw how the clerk was needing to handle every single item, to scan them and put them in a bag, to take that person's money and to hand it back, her change. What a gift and what a sacrifice. And she was so appreciative when I looked at her and said, "Thank you so much for being here today." In a time when we feel pretty powerless against an invisible virus, connecting with and helping others is something that we can do. Find out what your neighbors need and offer to share. Call a shut-in and do the same. Write a letter or send a card to someone, or make a quick phone call to someone perhaps who you haven't thought about or talked about in years, just to let them know that you love them. And if you have the means, send money to the agencies in our community that need your help desperately for donations to help those who are in the most need. Smile, wave, leave a thank you note in your mailbox or your newspaper box just to say thank you for faithfully delivering things to me every day at my curb. When you're looking out your windows at this beautiful spring, say a quick prayer for the folks who live in the houses you observe. And life. Above all, we have to remember that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. Martha had a belief in a resurrection that was about the future. She said, "I know that Lazarus will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." But Jesus' answer is, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live." As followers of Jesus, we know that this isn't the end, and that just as Jesus died and rose and ascended to heaven, so too we shall. But notice that Jesus says, "I am," not "I will be." It is a present tense statement. You see, we have a glimpse right now of resurrection and life, even in the midst of, maybe especially in the midst of challenging days. In fact, these days, any glimpse of joy and life and light are so special. Who knew how wonderful it would be to find a dozen eggs at the grocery store? And so we can savor a sunset or a sunrise, or the spring colors, or a Bible verse, or a poem, or thoughts or looks at people that we love. Just a week from today, we are going to enter into Holy Week with a heightened sense of how much the passion of Jesus means to us as we live in such a dangerous, upside-down time. Allow yourself and others the gift of tears. Enjoy and share in the incredible blessing of community. And live right now the abundant life through Jesus, who is the resurrection and the life, both now and forever. May it be so. Amen.